Picture this. It's a Saturday night at Orange County International Raceway in 1966, and a kid pulls up to the staging lanes in a base model Mustang coupe with the inline six. 44 horsepower, the same engine Ford put in cargo vans. Everyone's laughing at this thing until he runs a 14.8 in a car Ford rated at 22 seconds to 60 miles per hour. In a car that should be slower than a Volkswagen Beetle, this kid just embarrassed half the V8s at the strip. The disappointing reality of base model Mustangs. Let's rewind to April 1964. Ford launches the Mustang, and the automotive world loses its collective mind. They're calling it the car that saved Ford. The pony car revolution. The democratization of style. What they're not mentioning is that most of these cars were slow as continental drift. The base engine was Ford's 170 cubic inch inline six. This thing had been around since 1960. It was designed to be cheap, reliable, and adequate, in that order. Ford rated it at 101 horsepower in 1964. By 1965, with emissions equipment, that actually climbed to 120. But here's where the story gets interesting. The base Mustang got the absolute lowest specification, single-barrel carburetor, the Holley 1940C, flowing about 150 CFM. For context, a proper two-barrel flows 300. The compression ratio was 8.7 to 1. Pathetic even for 1965. The camshaft was so mild it basically didn't exist. And the transmission? The standard 3-speed had gear ratios optimized for fuel economy, not acceleration. First gear was 2.35 to 1. Agricultural. The rear axle was 2.83 to 1. By third gear at 40 miles per hour, the engine was already gasping for air at 4,000 RPM. Let's talk real numbers. Motor Trend tested a 65 Mustang 6 in June of 65. 0 to 60 took 22.2 seconds. The quarter mile came in 19.8 seconds at 64 miles per hour. That's slower than a Volkswagen Beetle. Let that sink in. Ford's hot new pony car with the long hood and aggressive stance was getting beat by Hitler's economy car. But people bought them anyway. In the first 2 years, Ford sold over 1.3 million Mustangs. About 40% had the inline six. That's over 500,000 six-cylinder Mustangs on American roads by late '66. Every single owner had the same problem. The car looked fast, sounded okay with the right exhaust, but at a stoplight, anything could take you. Volkswagen buses, Studebaker Larks, probably some riding lawnmowers. The price gap was significant. A base six-cylinder coupe cost $2,368. The 289 V8 added $356. For young buyers in 65, that might as well have been $3,000. So you had this massive population of Mustang 6 owners who wanted to go fast but couldn't afford the V8. They tried everything. Dual exhaust that added maybe 5 horsepower but mostly just noise. Multiple carburetors the intake wasn't designed for. Headers that helped but not enough to matter. These kids were polishing a turd with very limited resources. Every automotive magazine review was brutal. Car and Driver called it transportation in a pretty package. Road and Track said it had all the performance of a scenic overlook. Motor Trend noted it was perfectly adequate for normal driving, like going to the grocery store. Not fun driving, not spirited driving, just existing. The drag strip humiliation. Every small town in America in the 1960s had a drag strip, or at least a straight piece of road where people raced on weekends. And every weekend, some hopeful kid would show up in their base model Mustang, thinking maybe tonight would be different. It never was. The pecking order at drag strips was brutal and absolute. At the top were the purpose-built race cars, altered wheelbase Mopars, blown small blocks, factory-sponsored super stockers running in the 10s and 11s. Below them were the serious street cars, big block muscle, SS Chevelles, GTOs, Hemi Barracudas running 12s and 13s. Then you had the working man's muscle, small block Chevys, 289 Fords. These guys ran 14 and 15 second quarters. Not factory level fast, but respectable. and at the very bottom were the base model 6 cylinders, bone stock Falcons and Valiants and Novas, and Mustang 6s. These cars weren't there to race, really. They were there so their owners could hang out, watch the real cars, maybe make a pass or two for fun. Nobody expected them to be competitive. Nobody wanted to be beaten by them. And God help you if you lost to one. Racing a base Mustang 6 was an exercise in frustration. The launch was terrible because the torque curve was non-existent below 3,000 RPM. You'd drop the clutch and the car would bog. By the time you hit second gear at 30 miles per hour, you'd maybe hit your stride. Third gear came at 45, and that was basically it. You'd cross the line at maybe 70, watching the taillights of everything else disappear into the distance. The times were embarrassing. A good driver in a stock Mustang 6 might run 19.5 seconds at 65 miles per hour. Bad drivers saw 20-second passes. For context, a genuinely quick street car was running those times by the 60-foot mark. These Mustang 6s were so slow that the timing lights sometimes had trouble picking them up. But people kept trying, because it's one thing to know your car is slow. It's another thing to accept it. Every weekend, some kid would show up convinced he'd found the secret. New spark plugs, premium gas. Maybe he'd advance the timing a bit, and every weekend he'd run the same 19.5 seconds. The V8 guys would laugh. The serious racers wouldn't even watch. Some drag strips had a separate class for stock 6s. This was both merciful and humiliating. Merciful because at least you were racing people with similar cars. Humiliating because everyone knew the stock 6 class was the slow class, the participation trophy class, the maybe someday you'll afford a V8 class. Winning the stock 6 class at your local strip was technically an achievement, but nobody was impressed. Enter the unlikely hero. His name was Tommy Eckert, and he wasn't anyone special. He worked at a Ford dealership in Anaheim, California as a service writer. Not a mechanic, not an engineer, a service writer. His job was to talk to customers, write up repair orders, and occasionally explain why their warranty didn't cover racing damage. He was 24 years old in 1965 and drove a white Mustang coupe with the inline 6 and 3-speed manual. Tommy couldn't afford the V8. He'd tried to order one, but with dealer employee discount, he was still $300 short. So he got the 6 and told himself it was fine. It wasn't fine. He lived 3 miles from Orange County International Raceway. Every Friday night he could hear the cars. Every weekend he'd drive past and see the crowds. And every time he thought about going, he remembered he was driving the slow Mustang, the secretary special, the insurance salesman's car. But Tommy had one advantage. He listened. Part of his job was listening to mechanics diagnose problems. He'd heard them complain about emissions equipment strangling engines, about how Ford set the timing conservatively to prevent knock on low-octane gas, about how the automatic transmission cars ran different distributor curves than the manuals. He didn't understand all of it, but he filed it away. The breakthrough came in July 1966. A customer brought in a Fairlane wagon with the same 170 cubic inch 6. The guy was complaining about poor performance. The mechanic, an old-timer named Ray, checked the timing and found it was advanced way beyond spec. Apparently someone had worked on it and screwed up. Ray set it back to stock, which was 6 degrees before top dead center. The customer drove off and came back an hour later. The car felt worse, he said. Could they put it back the way it was? Ray was annoyed but obliged. He set the timing back to where it had been, 12 degrees before top dead center. The customer left happy. Ray muttered something about idiots and placebo effects, but Tommy had noticed something. The timing tag on the engine said 6 degrees. The Ford service manual said 6 degrees, but the customer swore the car ran better at 12. And Ray, despite his annoyance, hadn't argued with the customer's perception. That night, Tommy couldn't stop thinking about it. What if Ford's timing spec was conservative? What if there was power being left on the table just to prevent the 1 in 1,000 customer who used garbage gas from experiencing knock? It seemed crazy. Ford employed thousands of engineers. They'd tested these engines to death. But then again, those engineers were optimizing for durability and emissions and fuel economy, not performance. Nobody at Ford in 1965 cared if the base 6 could drag race. Tommy started reading everything he could find: shop manuals, automotive textbooks from the library, Hot Rod magazine tech articles. Most of it was about V8s, but the principles were the same. Ignition timing affected everything. Too little timing and you were leaving power on the table. Too much and you'd get detonation, which could destroy an engine. The trick was finding the sweet spot, and that sweet spot varied with engine design, fuel quality, compression ratio, and atmospheric conditions. The 176 had a fairly low compression ratio, 8.7 to 1. This meant it was actually pretty resistant to detonation. It could theoretically handle more timing advance than a high compression engine. The factory spec of 6 degrees seemed incredibly conservative. Most V8s of the era ran between 8 and 14 degrees initial advance. Why was the 6 so low? Tommy decided to experiment. He had a timing light, $22 from Sears. He had a distributor wrench. He had his own Mustang to practice on. And he had nothing to lose because the car was already slow. On a Tuesday night in early August 1966, he backed the Mustang into his apartment's carport and got to work. The simple mod that changed everything. The modification was so simple it was almost insulting. Loosen one bolt, rotate the distributor, tighten the bolt. That's it. No parts, no machining, no fabrication. Just changing where the distributor sat relative to the engine. Total cost, $0. Total time, 5 minutes. Total effect, everything. Tommy started conservative. He advanced the timing from the factory 6 degrees to 8 degrees. Just 2 degrees. He test drove the car around the neighborhood. It felt sharper. The throttle response was crisper. The engine didn't feel like it was laboring as much. No detonation, no pinging. Encouraged, he went back and added 2 more degrees. 10 degrees total. The difference was night and day. The car actually felt quick. Not fast, obviously, but quick. Responsive. Alive. He could chirp the tires shifting into second gear. He could actually accelerate hard enough to feel it in his back. It was still a 6-cylinder Mustang with a 3-speed, but it didn't feel like it was pulling a trailer full of sand anymore. But here's where Tommy got clever. He didn't stop at static timing. The distributor had a mechanical advance mechanism. As engine RPM increased, centrifugal weights inside would move outward, advancing the timing even further. This was necessary because at higher RPM, the combustion process needed to start earlier to achieve peak pressure at the right point in the power stroke. The factory advance curve was designed to reach maximum advance at around 2400 RPM. This made sense for highway cruising, but for drag racing where you're running the engine to its 5000 RPM redline, this curve was all wrong. You needed more advance, sooner. Tommy couldn't redesign the advance curve without modifying the distributor internals, but he could change the baseline. If he started with 14 degrees of initial timing instead of 6, and the mechanical advance added another 16 degrees, he'd be running 30 degrees of total advance. That was getting into serious territory. He tested 14 degrees initial. The car ran great at idle, great at cruise, and when he floored it, the thing absolutely came alive. The engine pulled harder than he'd ever felt. The power didn't fall off at 4,000 RPM like it used to. It kept pulling all the way to 5 grand. The acceleration between gears was dramatically improved. There was one problem. At 14 degrees, he was getting slight detonation under hard acceleration in hot weather. He could hear the pinging. This was bad. Detonation could destroy an engine. But Tommy had learned something from reading those tech articles. Detonation was affected by many factors. Timing, yes, but also fuel quality, ambient temperature, engine temperature, and load. He experimented with different grades of gas. The premium pump gas of 1966 was typically 100 to 102 octane, way higher than modern gas. With premium fuel, the detonation disappeared. He could run 14 degrees all day long without issues. The cost was an extra 3 cents per gallon. Totally worth it. But he wanted more. He carefully tested 15 degrees, 16. At 17 degrees initial, the engine started to fight the starter motor. The compression was trying to push the pistons back down before they reached top dead center. This was too much. He settled on 16 degrees as the sweet spot. The transformation was complete. His Mustang 6 didn't sound different, didn't look different, didn't have any new parts, but it felt like a completely different car. The throttle response was immediate. The power delivery was smooth and strong. The engine felt eager instead of reluctant. The cost-to-benefit ratio was absurd. $0, 5 minutes of work. And suddenly, his car was notably quicker. Quick enough that he thought maybe, just maybe, he could show up at the drag strip without being completely humiliated. The technical deep dive. To understand why this works so well, you need to understand what ignition timing actually does, and why Ford's engineers had set it so conservatively in the first place. This isn't complicated physics. It's just physics that most people never think about. Internal combustion engines work by converting chemical energy in gasoline into mechanical motion. You mix fuel and air, compress it, ignite it, and the expanding gases push the piston down. Simple, right? But the timing of that ignition is absolutely critical. Ignite too early and you're trying to push the piston down while it's still moving up during compression. This creates enormous stress on the connecting rods and can literally break things. Ignite too late and the piston is already moving down when combustion occurs, meaning you're not extracting maximum work from the fuel. The ideal ignition timing depends on how fast combustion happens. Gasoline doesn't explode, it burns. The flame front travels through the mixture at around 50 to 100 feet per second, depending on mixture density and turbulence. In a typical 4-inch diameter cylinder, this means combustion takes about 3 to 5 milliseconds. But here's the catch. During those 5 milliseconds, the engine is still turning. At 3,000 RPM, the crankshaft rotates 50 times per second. That's one complete rotation every 20 milliseconds. So in the 5 milliseconds combustion takes, the crankshaft has moved about 90 degrees. If you wait until the piston reaches top dead center to ignite the mixture, combustion won't be complete until the piston is a quarter of the way through the power stroke. You've wasted that initial expansion energy. This is why engines need ignition advance. You ignite the mixture before the piston reaches top dead center, so peak combustion pressure occurs just after top dead center, when the piston is starting its downward travel. Ford's inline 6 was running 6 degrees of initial advance. This was extremely conservative. It essentially guaranteed that even with the slowest possible combustion, you'd never get detonation. Detonation is when the fuel-air mixture ignites spontaneously before the flame front reaches it, creating a shockwave that can destroy pistons. But the 170 engine had several characteristics that made it detonation resistant. First, the low compression ratio of 8.7 to 1 meant lower combustion temperatures and pressures. Second, the compact combustion chamber meant the flame front didn't have far to travel. Third, and this is crucial, the fuel available in 1966 was much higher octane than modern gas. Regular was typically 94 octane. Premium was 100 to 102. Modern regular is 87. Octane rating is literally a measurement of detonation resistance. The fuel available in 66 could handle much more aggressive timing than Ford's conservative 6-degree setting. So why did Ford set it so low? Because they were optimizing for the worst-case scenario. They had to account for customers who'd use cheap gas, engines that were poorly maintained with carbon buildup, hot weather operation, high altitude, towing heavy loads. All these factors increased detonation likelihood. Ford's engineers weren't stupid. They knew they were leaving power on the table, but their job wasn't to make the fastest engine. It was to make an engine that would run reliably for 100,000 miles in the hands of an owner who might never change the oil. The 6-degree timing was bulletproof. It was also boring. Tommy's modification exploited this engineering conservatism. By advancing the timing to 16 degrees initial, he was running close to the edge with period-correct pump gas, but not over it. And the performance gains were substantial because he was recovering all that lost efficiency. The first victory and how word spread. Tommy showed up at Orange County International Raceway on a Friday night in late August 1966. He paid his $5 entry fee, got his tech inspection sticker, and nervously pulled into the staging lanes. He hadn't told anyone about the timing modification. He wasn't sure it would work. He wasn't even sure he wouldn't blow up his engine on the first pass. His first run was conservative. He short-shifted at 4,000 RPM, not wanting to stress the engine. The Mustang launched harder than it ever had. Second gear pulled strong. Third gear actually had some acceleration left. He crossed the line and waited for his time slip. 17.9 seconds at 71 miles per hour. Tommy stared at that slip for a full minute. 17.9. He just knocked nearly 2 seconds off his previous best time. With no parts, no modifications visible to the naked eye. Just timing. He made another pass, shifting at 5,000 this time. 17.4 at 73. Holy shit. Word spread fast in the pits. A white Mustang 6 running mid-17s? That didn't make sense. Stock Mustang 6s ran low 19s. Mid-17s required serious engine work. Headers, intake, carb, gears. At minimum $1,000 in parts. People started wandering over to look at Tommy's car. Pop the hood, someone said. Tommy did. Everyone stared. Stock air cleaner. Stock carburetor. Stock exhaust manifolds. Stock everything. Nothing that would indicate this car was anything other than a bone stock secretary special. "What the hell did you do?" someone asked. Tommy could have lied. Could have said it was ported heads or a secret cam, but he was too excited. "Timing," he said. "I advanced the timing to 16 degrees. That's it." The crowd was skeptical. No way timing alone was worth that much. But Tommy showed them his tech card, showed them the original timing spec sticker still under the hood. "Do it yourself if you don't believe me," he said. Several people did exactly that. They went home, grabbed timing lights, and advanced their distributors. Some went too far and got detonation. Some went too conservative. But the ones who hit the sweet spot around 14 to 16 degrees saw the same massive improvements. By mid-September, half the Mustang 6s at Orange County were running advanced timing. The results were consistent. Stock Mustang 6s running 19.5 seconds were suddenly running 17 to 17.5. That's a 2-second improvement. In drag racing, that's enormous. And these guys were doing it for free in their driveways. Detroit's reaction and corporate denial. Ford knew about the timing trick within weeks. They had to. Dealership mechanics were seeing customers come in with timing set way beyond spec. Service writers were getting questions about ignition advance. And Ford's regional offices were hearing reports from drag strips. But their response was predictable and infuriating. An internal memo from Ford's powertrain division, dated October 1966, acknowledged that certain owners were advancing ignition timing beyond factory specifications. The memo warned that this practice could lead to engine damage and was not covered under warranty. Dealers were instructed to reset timing to factory specs during service and inform customers that modifications voided their warranty. But here's what Ford couldn't say publicly. The modification worked. And it worked because Ford had been overly conservative in their timing specifications. Admitting this would open them up to criticism. Why were they selling engines that made less power than they could? Why were customers doing better engineering than Ford's own engineers? The answers were complicated and made Ford look bad. Privately, Ford's engineers tested the advanced timing setup. Their conclusion, obtained through a Freedom of Information request decades later, was fascinating. On premium fuel and ideal conditions, 16 degrees initial advance did not cause detonation or premature engine wear. Performance improvements were measured at approximately 15 horsepower peak and significantly improved torque curve. However, on regular fuel or in hot weather operation, detonation could occur above 13 degrees advance. Ford's position was that they had to design for all conditions and all customers. They couldn't assume everyone would use premium fuel. They couldn't assume engines would be well maintained. The conservative 6-degree timing ensured reliability at the expense of performance. And in 1966, reliability sold more cars than performance in the 6-cylinder segment. But the real reason Ford couldn't officially acknowledge the modification was emissions. By late 1966, California's emission standards were becoming serious. Advanced timing increased NOx emissions because higher combustion temperatures produce more nitrogen oxides. Ford was already struggling to meet current standards. Encouraging customers to advance timing beyond spec would make emissions compliance even harder. Some Ford dealers quietly spread the word anyway. The young mechanics and service writers who were into cars knew the trick worked. They'd mention it to customers they liked. Off the record, of course. Can't officially recommend it, but if you were to advance your timing to about 14 degrees, your car would run better. Wink. Wink. This created a weird underground network where information flowed despite corporate disapproval. The aftermarket responded faster than Ford. By early 1967, companies were selling adjustable timing pointers and performance distributors for the 176. These distributors had modified advance curves that worked better with advanced initial timing. Some had lighter springs for quicker advance. Some had modified weights for different total advance. The Mustang 6 suddenly had a legitimate performance aftermarket. Magazine coverage was limited. Hot Rod and Carcraft didn't care much about 6-cylinder engines. But some smaller regional magazines ran technical articles about ignition timing. They never explicitly said, advance your Mustang's timing to 16 degrees, but they explained the principles and let readers draw their own conclusions. This was the era before emissions testing and safety regulations had locked down everything. People were still expected to work on their own cars and make their own decisions. The broader impact and legacy, the timing modification, had ripple effects beyond just Mustang 6s. Once people realized that factory timing specs were often conservative, they started experimenting with other engines. Small block Chevys, Mopar Slant 6s, even some V8s benefited from slight timing advances beyond factory spec. The entire hot rodding community became more sophisticated about ignition tuning, but the glory days were short-lived. California's emission standards got stricter every year. By 1968, cars needed smog certification. Part of that certification was verification that ignition timing met factory specifications. Advancing your timing beyond spec meant you'd fail inspection. The modification went from accepted practice to illegal overnight. The Federal Clean Air Act of 1970 essentially killed the modification nationwide. Tampering with emissions-related components, including ignition timing, became a federal offense. Shops couldn't legally do it. Manufacturers couldn't recommend it. The underground network of timing tricks got shut down by bureaucracy. The irony was thick. An essentially free modification that made engines run more efficiently and use less fuel was now illegal because it slightly increased one category of emissions. Modern engines have solved this problem through computer control. Engine management systems adjust timing constantly based on dozens of sensor inputs. NOx sensors detect detonation and automatically retard timing. Temperature sensors advance timing when it's safe. Oxygen sensors optimize mixture. Modern engines run far more aggressive timing than Ford's engineers in '66 would have dreamed possible because the computer can manage the edge cases that worried them. But the principle remains. Ignition timing is still one of the most powerful tuning tools available. Modern tuners with laptop computers can extract huge power gains by optimizing timing maps. They're doing the same thing Tommy did in 1966, just with more precision and control. The basic physics hasn't changed. Start combustion at the right time and you make more power. Start it at the wrong time and you leave performance on the table. The legacy of Tommy's discovery, because that's really what it was, lives on in every tuning shop and drag strip. The idea that manufacturers often leave power on the table for reliability and emissions reasons. That sometimes the best modifications are the simplest ones. That expensive parts don't always beat smart tuning. These lessons shaped modern automotive performance culture. Today, finding a stock 64 to 66 Mustang 6 is nearly impossible. Most were either crashed, crushed, or had V8 swapped in. The few survivors are usually restored to factory original condition, which means slow. But somewhere out there, maybe in a barn or garage, there's probably a white 66 Mustang coupe with the timing advanced to 16 degrees, still running, still quick, still proof that sometimes the best engineering is the engineering you do yourself. The story also reminds us that regulations have costs. The timing modification was safe when done properly with premium fuel. It made engines more efficient. It gave young people with limited budgets a way to enjoy performance. But in the name of emissions control, it became illegal. Maybe that was necessary, maybe it wasn't, but it definitely took away something fun.